Yo, yo, yo. We're back. We're back. I've got a mic. We're ready to go. Today is going to be the start of a series about biomechanics of disc golf. Today we're laying down the foundation of the knowledge that you need to have to understand the rest of the videos. This video is going to be a quick run through of some anatomical and biomechanical terms. And I'll explain what they mean, what movements they are. It's mainly going to be movements, and hopefully this will arm you with the tools you need to engage in discussion about form in the future. Let's get into it. Okay, we're going to work from the ground up. First of all, we're going to start with our ankles, but before we get there, I just want to introduce some general biomechanical principles, I guess. The first one we want to remember is flexion forward, FF. So if someone's talking about flexion, we take this position here. This is called the anatomical position. Everything that we talk about in this video will be in reference to this position here. So flexion is forward. That's the general rule, except for the knee. I'll explain later when we get into the other joints, but flexion is defined as the lessening of an angle at a joint. Extension is the increasing of an angle at a joint. Abduction, so I'll give you an example with my arms. This is flexion of the elbow, this is extension of the elbow. Simple. Abduction is moving of a limb or digit away from the midline. So this is the midline of my body, so abduction is like this. Think of, you're being abducted by aliens. And adduction is when you're adding to the midline. That's how I remember it. It's pretty easy. Rotation is rotation. It's as it sounds. So that's rotation of the femur. Then there are some special cases for the ankle and the wrist, but I'll get into them later. Let's get into it. So, starting at the ankle, we have flexion and extension, but they have slightly different names. So if you point your toe like that, that's called plantar flexion. Like you're planting your foot, plantar flexion. Easy. If you bring your toe towards you, that's called dorsiflexion, because the dorsal aspect of your foot is moving towards you. That's how I remember it. Inversion and eversion can't actually be achieved by your foot muscles and your leg muscles. So if you roll your ankle, that's called inversion when it goes towards your midline, or eversion when it goes away. I don't know if you can see that very well. When you roll your ankle, it's called inversion. But we can't produce that movement by ourselves. We need external forces. So what we do have is pronation and supination. So supination is a combination of inversion and plantar flexion. So it's kind of like pointing your toes but then going inwards. And then obviously pronation is just the opposite. That's just because of the attachment of the muscle of the foot. That's all you really need to know about them. Usually people use inversion and eversion more often, but technically it is pronation, supination. Right. Now to the knee. This one's a little weird. Technically at the knee, it's not flexion forward. So flexion is backward at the knee because when you're developing, instead of coming posteriorly, your knees come anterior. I probably should have gone over that. That's all right. Anterior, posterior, like your posterior. Superior is up, inferior is down. Lateral is sideways, so that's lateral. This is medial. Proximal means like close to the body. Distal means far away from the body. Hopefully I've got all of those. Right, back to where I was. At the knee, it's reversed. So that's flexion and that's extension, you know. So flexion is actually backwards at the knee, but most other joints, it's forward. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Your knee does have some degree of rotation, only when it's flexed, but we don't talk about that. Yeah, I think that's everything for the knee. At the hip, we have flexion, forwards, extension, backwards. We have abduction, like this, and adduction, which would be like that. Yeah, pretty simple. The other two that we have are rotation. So there's internal or medial and external or lateral rotation. So internal rotation is when you do this. So you might be able to see or imagine my femur is rotating like that. It's rolling around, and that's what causes my knee to cave in. So if you're throwing a backhand, your left knee caves in like that. That's called internal rotation. External rotation is just the opposite. If you ever did like warm-ups, you do open the gates, close the gates. That's internal rotation, external rotation. An easy way to remember if people are using medial and lateral as a substitute is if you do medial rotation, your knee comes to the midline. If you do lateral, then your knee goes away from the midline. That's how I like to remember it. Yeah, that's it for the hip. Now the spine. The spine is a little bit different. So there are 3 sections, and they sort of produce different movements. Well, it's the same movement, but in different amounts. So the lower part of your spine that we're going to address today is called the lumbar spine. Because of the way the joints work, you have things like this that mean it can't rotate all that much because it just hits bone. So if you twist like this, your lower back doesn't actually do that much rotation. So that's called rotation or axial rotation, but we don't get much of that in the lumbar spine. You have flexion, which is forwards. So flexion forwards, again, there's not as much in the lumbar spine, but there's still a little bit. And then you have lateral flexion. So that's like this. Again, not that much. Your lumbar spine's pretty secure. Generally speaking, with your spine, the further up you go, the more mobile it's going to be. In your thoracic spine, the facet joints actually change direction. So through your thoracic spine is where most rotation comes from. So again, same movements at the thoracic spine, it's just a little bit more mobile. And same again in your cervical spine, which is what most people call their neck. So again, axial rotation, lateral flexion, flexion, extension. It's all the same as the other parts of the spine. Right, I think we've got that all covered. Next we have the shoulder. This has a couple different movements because it's technically a few different joints. Flexion is forwards, extension is backwards, abduction, adduction, external rotation, internal rotation, or external, internal. You also have circumduction, which you can do at the hip as well, but I forgot to mention that. So that's a combination of flexion, extension, abduction, and adduction. So this. Sweet. You also have some other specialized movements. So you have horizontal adduction and abduction. So that means bring your arm to horizontal and then bring it across your body. As we're pointing towards the midline, this is horizontal adduction, and the opposite would be abduction. The one more relevant term is protraction and retraction. So that's when your scapula moves forward and back like this. It's technically not at your shoulder joint, it's at the scapula. We'll call it that, because I can't remember the real name right now. So that's a specialized movement. The scapula also does depression and elevation. So depression is going down, elevation's going up. That's happening at the scapula. Yeah, elbow, flexion forwards, extension backwards. Simple. Wrists and hands. I'm going to introduce some terms. These are actually relevant at the foot as well, but I didn't talk about them. So you can abduct and adduct your fingers. So if you spread them like that, that is abduction, because you're taking them away from the midline of your hand. And the opposite, obviously putting them together, is adduction. Wrist flexion is, well, technically that. Wrist extension, finger flexion, finger extension. Yeah. And then you have, so this bone down the pinky aspect of your forearm, that is called your ulna. The one that runs by your thumb is your radius. So if you do that, that's ulnar deviation, that's radial deviation. Yeah, you also have interphalangeal joints, but again, we technically, well, I tend to lump them in together with wrist and finger flexion because it's the same muscles that are producing it. Yeah. So hopefully that wasn't too quick. That should be a pretty good overview of all the different actions at joints. I might do a video in the future about what muscles produce which movements, but that one might take a little longer. Yeah, I think I've got everything. Hopefully I will see you in the next video and we can begin discussing footwork.